After uploading my Behringer versus Korg Odyssey comparison, a few people asked how the plugin versions of the Odyssey compare to the hardware. As Korg has just had its Black Friday sale, I was able to pick up the whole collection for a very reasonable $99. So I thought to put this together comparing the GMedia Oddity 2 with Korg's own plugin version, which is also available for the iPad. I'm comparing them against the Korg Odyssey re-release, which again, if you've seen me comparing it to the Behringer, will know they're both very close. And as the Korg had the original designer in their team, I'd be surprised if either were therefore too far from the original sound. And this isn't a review of these synths, they are both really nice synths. They've got plenty of really nice sounding presets in each of them. Look at all the bass tones, for example, that you get in the GMedia Oddity. But I'm not going to go through everything on each of them, because this is about comparing them to the hardware. But what you're going to hear is that they are not as close to the hardware as some of the other apps I've tested. So although they've got similar functionality and they can do similar things, you can't match them up identically. They don't sound the same. If you've seen any of these videos before, you'll know the setup. I've bounced down the plugins and recorded the output of the hardware through a UAD Apollo, and that helps me make sure I've got repeatability and that all the settings are bang on and you don't have to watch me tweaking everything to the nth degree. On the top, we've got the hardware in orange, then the Korg app in a light blue, followed by GMedia and the bottom in purple. And up on the top, we've got the MIDI data, and I've been using the same data for both the apps. And if we look at the prices of them, the Oddity 2 is coming in at £33, so that's amazing value, isn't it? The iOS ARP Odyssey is around $20, I think. It's not showing me on here. And the whole Korg collection, I think it's $250, but as I say, I got it $99 in the sale. And the Odyssey on its own, I think, is $99. But in the Legacy collection, you get all these, which is quite nice. Oh, so there you go, generally $99 and currently on at $69.99. I had a code from the MicroKey that gave me the Korg M1 LE, so there's an extra bonus offer if you've got one of those, so worth checking that out. So it's worth taking a look at the GUIs and what they can do as well. Both look very similar based on revision 3. I think the Korg app has just slightly nicer graphics to it. Open it up to see the keyboard and open it up again, and it's got a sequencer on the top and a row of effects. The Oddity is slightly harder to read, but it does have an extra LFO and an extra ADSR envelope, and it's got a delay, but it doesn't have the other effects that the Korg has. And this has also got a sub that the Korg doesn't have either. But they've both got the 3 filter types. But matching sounds doesn't necessarily mean you're matching exactly where the sliders are, although it's quite similar. But neither of them can be resized, or if they can, I can't find out how to do it. If you look at the Korg, for example, the view options is the same as these. This is on a relatively large screen, 23-inch I think it is. So you get the idea. On a smaller laptop screen, they're amply sized. Okay, let's start off by listening to the Sawtooth then. And if I was picking winners there, I'd say the GMedia wins over the Korg there, doesn't it? Korg's a little bit fizzy. And I should just mention levels in this. I've tried to level match them as well as I can. On the VU meters, when they're exactly the same, they sound completely different, and that's because there are different harmonics in each of the waveforms. Different speakers or monitoring systems will pick out different harmonics, and some are louder than others, and there's nothing I can do to make them all sound perfectly level on everyone's system. So before I get comments about that, because I normally do. Anyway, let's just listen to those again. But there's a definite buzz to the Korg. Let's have a listen to them just play quickly. Let's move on to the Square. So the Oddity there is like a perfect square sound, isn't it? There's none of those small intermediate harmonics that give it that extra buzz. Let's have a look at the GMedia again. Looking at this frequency analysis, it looks like a perfect square. Lots of intermediates going on in the Korg app and in the hardware. Sort of a halfway house, isn't it? Listen to them again. So neither of them sound anything like the hardware to my ears anyway, which is a bit of a shock because when I've done the mini mode comparisons or the Pro one, I mean, there's been slight differences, but these just don't sound like the same instrument to me. So that was supposedly a 50% perfect square. Here we now have them at their smallest pulse. Again, all different. Look at the sizes of that pulse again in the bottom right. The core gap's a bit fatter than the hardware, and the GMedia is a bit thinner than the hardware. Let's look at those from minimum to maximum. So all I'm doing here is taking the pulse width of oscillator 1 all the way up and then all the way down again. But they all do pulse, and they go from 50-ish to thin-ish. None of them go through 0, so they act similar, but they don't sound the same. Whether that's important to you, I don't know. So here now we've looked at the Sawtooth and the square on the VCOs, and the next up is the ring mod. And what I've done here is just taken oscillator 2 and taken it from its minimum up to its maximum, and listening only to the ring mod. So in the mid-ish frequencies, it does a similar thing, but they don't go to the same extremes. Listening to the extremes again. So just not the same, are they? But you know, I am taking things to the very extremes here. When you're designing the sound, you tend not to do that. So because it was so different, I thought, well, let's just do a couple of sounds that are more sort of mid-range, sort of more standard sound. So this is a PWM, just to see if they sound similar with similar settings. I think the GMedia was closer again there. I think it's worth mentioning that the GMedia is a lot less CPU intensive, because when you bounce these down, it takes about half the time of the core gap. But it sounds good there. Closer than the core gap. And I have spent quite a long time actually trying to get these sounds to sound similar. So if they don't sound the same, it's not because I can't do it. It's literally because it is because I can't do it. So if they don't sound the same, it is because I can't do it, but I can't do it because it's so difficult, or they just don't lend themselves to that tone. So here's another. I've added a little bit of reverb or delay to these as well, just to show you how they'd fit in a mix. So when you stay within the sort of reasonable limits, they are all acting the same. And part of the fun and joy of using the app is that it has the same controls. It can do similar things, not necessarily it sounds exactly the same. But as I say, if that's important to you, this might be of interest. Okay, moving on to the filters now. I've done filter sweeps of each of them on the 3 VCF types, starting with the cutoff on maximum and then increasing the resonance up to full, and then bringing the VCF frequency down to minimum. I'm going to rattle through this because there are 9 to do. Watch your ears, because when the resonance comes in, it can be painful. So just be careful. As these get halfway in, the resonance will start peaking. So that was the hardware, and you'll notice that you didn't get any drop in volume when you brought in the resonance, which you do when you do the 24 dB filters, like on a Moog ladder filter. So we'll be listening for that, and we'll be listening for the smoothness of the sweep. This one gets really resonant, so really do take care with your ears. Some lovely bass on there, but what you do hear is stepping. And I tried a few things to stop the stepping, and nothing worked. So I think it's just sort of built into the app. See if we can open this. And if you look at these regions, there should be a smooth transition from 0 to maximum. And the same for the resonance. So we shouldn't really be hearing any stepping. So just listening to the sweep with the resonance on full and bringing the cutoff down again. Definitely steppy, isn't it? So the same again, VCF Type 1 on the Oddity. First thing we're getting there is the drop in volume, which you shouldn't really get. I don't know why it does that, because GMedia are normally really good on the modelling, so this is sort of bamboozled me a bit. I had to go back and double check I got all the right settings, but I had. Much smoother than the Korg app though, isn't it? I'm moving on to filter type 2, which was the Moog 24 dB style ladder filter, which they got in trouble with Moog for back in the 70s, which is why they came up with number 3 themselves. So the volume of this should drop when we bring the resonance in. Again, lovely bass, but very steppy. And again, be careful with this one, because I know the resonance on this is really piercing. Some nice thunderous bass though, isn't there? So let's move on to filter type 3 then. Doing those runs by hand, I'm a little bit quicker, aren't I? Okay, to the Korg app. Get a lot less resonance there on the Oddity, don't you? How does that compare? Just quickly with the hardware. Now the hardware is a much higher as a resonance than the fundamental. Check again. And on this, the resonance is lower than the fundamental. So how does that translate to writing music? I've tuned them all to the same cutoff frequency with quite a high amount of resonance. So if you can make any sense of any of that, VCF Type 1, followed by VCF Type 2, followed by VCF Type 3. And, you know, they're all sounding quite different, aren't they? But the point being is that they do sound different. So here I've left the resonance quite high and I've modulated the cutoff from around 500 to 1000 hertz. Can't get it exact because of the stepping. And the stepping you hear there is the filter picking out the harmonics of the waveform, because this is the analog synth and it's perfectly smooth. So it's not as harmonic type stepping, is it? It just sounds sort of unnatural. And now for the GMedia. So a lot smoother, but whether it sounds like this, not bad. I was getting a little bit disappointed now because I thought they just don't sound anything alike. I was getting a bit depressing because it's so hard to make them sound alike. So I thought I'll do a little ring mod sound, one that you might use in a track, and I've separated the two VCOs by a seventh, so 7 semitones, and brought the ring mod in on top. Just back to the original. Don't know what was going on with that there, just couldn't get that right. So the GMedia's winning there again. So it's up, down, swings and roundabouts all the way. Now a more complex tone that I think it's got a square in, it's got a sawtooth, and it's got a bit of ring mod. And it's a bass tone you might use in a track. And I just couldn't get that GMedia to sound anything like the original. I was getting all sorts of distortions and stuff. The envelopes, you can hear the envelopes are all slightly different. And this is after a while tweaking them. I tended to find the GMedia envelopes were more reminiscent to the hardware than the Korg was. So GMedia loses on this sound, it won on the previous sound. As I say, it's up and down. Then I thought, let's just do a sort of a straight arpeggio, single oscillator. And that, you won't believe it, took me ages and I just couldn't get them to sound the same. So here's the tones in a more simplistic pattern, just going through the 3 filter types again. And as I say, you know, it sounds like I've not even bothered with this, but I was tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and, you know, just give up in the end because they don't sound the same. So you can hear differences in volume, differences in tone, differences in envelopes. So it wasn't a very happy bunny after doing all this. But it does show that other videos I've done with the, say, the 106 versus the Cloud, or the Mini Moog versus the Mini Moog apps, or the Pro 1 versus the UHI, that when I say they sound the same, I'm playing with these synths, I've got them in front of me and I can easily replicate something almost identical. Not a chance with this. So I've put that arpeggio again, I've put a little bit of sync in there as well. I've got the tuning of Oscillator2 really high and just brought in a little bit of ADSR to give a little bit of that sync sound. And it actually makes it sound a little bit resonant, which is quite nice. But I've tried my best to get them to sound the same. And I know people are going to say, oh my God, you're rubbish at that. But honestly, so difficult. And just to show how difficult it's been to match the sounds, I've matched them sort of similarly with a bit of sync on Oscillator2. So sounding okay so far, but then I tried to turn that into a little bit of an arpeggiated patch, so bringing the decay down. And bring that down on the Korg. Shortening the decay. But there is a sort of difference in the sync there, so let's just drop the sync down because I don't want it to sound so crazy. So this is sounding much sort of harsher, the Oddity, isn't it? Bring the decay up a bit more. So I've got the settings very similar, and it was sounding okay a minute ago. It was sounding the same, and just by dropping the decay and dropping the ADSR amount going into the frequency of Oscillator2, it's lost it, hasn't it? This sounds a bit smoother on the Korg, but knocking up the ADSR hasn't got as much punch, has it? The output on the Oddity is always louder, by the way. Try and make that longer. It seems to go all sort of resonant, doesn't it? So, you know, you start off with a point where it sounds very, very similar. You just think, I'll just drop the decay and I'll get a little punchy arpeggiator line from them both. And as soon as you start tweaking, they just start drifting apart. And they both drift apart from the original as well. So these final 3 patterns that I played you, it wasn't me just being awful. I just gave up in the end. Hence me showing you why it was so difficult. So in conclusion, neither of them sound like the hardware. Plus points and minus points on both of them. My preferred one is actually the Korg over the GMedia. GMedia's a bit older now though, isn't it, as well? But the GMedia does give you an extra LFO, it gives you an extra ADSR, it gives you a sub. So once you get into sound design, you can do a lot more with the GMedia. The Korg gives you a nice arpeggiator and a lot more effects. But to be honest, you get them inside the door anyway, so they wouldn't sell it to me. It just feels a bit smoother to use, to be honest. And as I say, GMedia's a bit older. All in all, a little bit disappointed in both of them, to be honest. So, I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and if you've got either of these, I hope I haven't disappointed you too much. But see you next time.